All right, Shalom. First and foremost, before I get started, I'd like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Ruach HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Peace and blessings unto the hopeful elect, pushing his word throughout the four corners of the earth in truth, righteousness, and sincerity. To you I say Shalom. This is the brother Yeshaya coming at you again through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. And in this lesson, pretty much going to go into some articles. Um, the title of this video will be "Get This Truth While You Can," right? Because as we know we're approaching the end times, man. We're in the end times, right? You see all around you the signs. It's all there. You have the prophets, right? You got this truth out here, and really, there's no denying it. If you have the eyes to see, you know, if the Most High gave you the spirit to be able to perceive what's going on around you, it ain't that hard to put one and two together, right? But the point being, is that we're coming to a time where that's spoken about in prophecy, where, as a matter of fact, I'm just gonna get it, but it's in Amos 8, right? Where you ain't gonna be able to access this truth or this information freely, right? It's gonna come to a point where everything's gonna be censored, everything's gonna be blocked, right? There's gonna be no more anonymity, you know, and especially with this digital ID that's being rolled out in the EU nations and eventually gonna roll out over here, you're gonna be set up in a system like they have in China, the credit scores, social credit score, where they're gonna monitor everything. You can watch that TV show. What's it called? Black Mirror. And there was an episode. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Um, but pretty much it touches into that digital ID, where every action that you do, or in social media, any post or any negative comments or anything that you subscribe to or ever said on the internet is going to be thrown into that into that social credit score, and either you're gonna go up or you're gonna go down in the rankings based off what you say. And you know and China's is a good example of this. When you look at their social credit score, those that drop to a certain low, they're pretty much barred from certain things in the city, whether it's transportation, whether it's different jobs, right? Pretty much things are gonna be, you're gonna be limited, right? And this is the future that they're wanting to bring forward over here in America, which will eventually lead to the MOTB, right? But this famine of the word is what we're seeing, one of the phases that they're trying to issue in, right? And it's gonna be through this, right? Through that digital ID, through um, pretty much barring people from the internet. But this is Amos 8 and verse 11. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord power, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." Right? So, yeah, of course, it's going to be famine of bread, of water, because all this is talked about. But the famine of the word, meaning when pretty much you're going to make it illegal to talk about certain topics. You already have the whole thing with the small hats calling it anti-Sem to even speak about them. Calling it what, hate speech. They can deem a lot of these things that is spoken about in the scriptures as hate speech. So just with that, they can block certain things. But it's gonna get, like I said, it's gonna get even further, because there's certain things that we say that they can't really um, I guess, justify blocking, but through them bringing out these different things, as I'm gonna go into in this article, they can set up the stage to bring more censorship, right? But continuing on, it says Amos 8 and verse 12, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east they shall run to and fro and seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. Right, so it's going to be hard to attain this information. It ain't going to be as easily accessible as it is now, where you have the prophets on the streets, you have these videos on YouTube and other various platforms. The internet is going to be, you know, uh, um, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny as far as uh, requirements in order to access the internet or post anything on the internet, right? But it says, and then having access to the internet too, and searching different things. Your searches are going to be going through an AI algorithm that's going to be constantly monitoring, what people do, what people say, what people post, what people, search, right? Again, we're entering, like how you see in movies, this dystopian society, right, where everything is monitored, everybody's watched, right? And if you go against the norms, you're gonna get, a ticket or cite some type of citation, or they can just, block you from having access to certain, uh, 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 activities, events, right? Certain stores, transportation, right? And I talked about also the UBI, um, universal basic income, or what they call universal high income, right? Um, but with that, they can limit you on what you get, because like I said, all these things is something that they're throwing out there of what the future is going to look like, right? But we know it's going to be worse than what they're actually saying, because like I said, all this is a way to bottleneck the people into receiving ultimately the MOTB, right? The mark of the beast, right? The implantable device, implantable chip under the skin. But let's see, going back, verse 13, it says, "In that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst." Right? We're going to be thirsty for this truth. We're going to be seeking for answers, right? People, whenever this Jacob's trouble starts to ramp up even more, people are going to be asking for answers. People are going to be wondering what is going on, right? How to escape this, what to prepare for. People are going to be having all kinds of answers that none of these, you know, other religions, the church itself, they have no answers, and they're not preparing the people as far as what's about to happen. You see? And only the scriptures, only the prophets have those answers. Starting over here with GMS, right? From our elders and from our apostles and elders on down, right? So let me see. Let's go ahead and jump into the article. So this is from The Guardian. It says the world wants to ban children from social media, but there will be grave consequences for us all. So it says age verification systems require collecting sensitive data to support the biometric information. In no time, the internet will become a fully surveilled, can't even say it, surveyed digital uh, panopticon. But it says over the past year, more than 24 countries around the world have proposed bans on social media use for vast swaths of their public. These laws, often proposed under the guise of child safety, are ushered in an era of mass surveillance and widespread censorship. Right, so they're using these so-called child safety, you know, laws, in order to restrict access to the internet, right? Because you have a lot of these pedos and a lot of these, predators coming out here on the internet, luring kids in. You know what to do. I mean, you see the videos online, so you know these things are happening, but they're using this as an excuse to bring in, pretty much like an internet lockdown, so to speak, right? Where you're only going to have access to it if you have uh, the right identification, or you got to identify yourself, is what I'm saying, in order for you to have access to it. So there's going to be no anonymity, in the internet, in the web, right? Meaning they're going to know who you are. They're going to be able to put a name and a face to whoever is saying certain things and whoever is searching up certain things. You know what I'm saying? But it says, um, contributing to what scholars have called a global free speech recession, right? Because that's what's happening. There's a war against information. There's a war against your so-called constitutional rights, right? You gotta understand, these elite, they're ready to wipe their ass with your rights. They don't give a shit. All this shit about the Constitution, you know what I'm saying? Uh, all that shit is over with, right? It's a new era, a new world order that's about to be instituted, right, with new laws. But it says, last year, Australia became the first country to ban anyone under the age of 16 from accessing social media. The move emboldened other countries around the world to quickly follow suit. Germany's ruling party announced it was backing a social media ban. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, called for a ban on social media for under 15s. In the UK, Keir Starmer has sought to enact sweeping social media bans. Greece, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Japan have also pursued similar online identity verification laws. You see, and I get it. For the younger kids not to get online, but to institute these, different laws, and really, Esau, he throws these things out here. He creates the chaos, right? He, because he operates under Hegelian dialectic, where he creates a problem, you know, and creates a certain reaction amongst the people, and then he comes in with a solution, right? And it's all to push people into the direction where he wants the populace, uh, um, pretty much to go into, right? And then he will establish certain laws, put things into place to where he's able to benefit, right, or push his agenda. But let's see. Continuing on, it says, in the U.S., online age verification laws have passed or are being considered in more than half of the nation's states. In the coming weeks, a package of 19 child safety bills, several which require identity verification for social media, are set to move forward in the House of Representatives. Big tech platforms such as Meta, Google, and Discord have begun pre-complying with the laws in order to go ahead of regulation, to get ahead of regulation. Um, let's read a little bit more. It says, while social media bans may seem like a prudent measure to protect children, they are not only ineffective, they endanger both children and adults. There is little evidence that social media is driving any type of widespread mental health crisis in children. Studies have repeatedly shown the opposite. Removing anonymity from the web, which will inevitably happen when tech companies are required to identify and ban children, allows for easier government tracking, you see, and censorship of journalists, activists, and whistleblowers who rely on online anonymity. And while some claim the laws would curb big tech's power, only the largest companies have the resources to shoulder the extensive costs of age verification systems. It says nonprofit and indie platforms could be forced to close, consolidating big tech's power further. Mass surveillance systems, once constructed, could also be easily leveraged by governments and bad actors. Um, so that's pretty much it. You know what I'm saying? We don't got to read more. That was pretty much it on this. But I do have another article, right? It's from the People's Voice. So it says EU declares non-compliant citizens who reject Bill Gates of hell digital ID will be banned from the internet. Right. So again, this whole thing of receiving a digital ID and identifying yourself before getting online, all this is what they're moving towards, right? Again, this is a step to hinder the word from being pushed, because that's the ultimate goal, right? To hinder this word, you know. But we understand, this is coming, you know. There's a certain time that this word is meant to be out here, and to do the work of the Lord. Well, now is a time where the Most High is about to close the curtains and bring judgment, right? Where those who have heard the word and rejected it are going to be judged, right? And those who do have the word, who have received the word, you know, ultimately they're the ones that's going to be sealed, right? To receive that deliverance, that protection that's going to be offered in these dark times, right? And Lord willing, will be part of that elect, man, right? Because dark times is coming where this man, as the scripture says, is going to come in like a flood, right? So he's going to exhaust all his resources just to come after, the elect. But it says the European Union is turning the internet into a permission-based system where ordinary citizens must surrender their digital identity to participate in modern society. European Commission Slovakia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is fast-tracking plans that will require every social media user to provide government-approved digital ID just to log in. What is sold as child protection will soon make verified digital ID the price of entry into online life, the place where ordinary people work, socialize, shop, debate, and organize. Von der Leyen announced this week that the EU is actively pursuing a bloc-wide social media ban for minors. I believe we must consider a social media delay, she said in Copenhagen. Depending on the results, we could come up with a legal proposal this summer. She praised Australia's under 16 ban and pushed Europe to follow. Childhood and early adolescence are formative years, and I believe we should give our children more time to become resilient to this vulnerable phase. Right. So as the scripture says, um, if they do anything good, let me get that real quick. Hold on, it's not popping up. Okay, right here. Sirach 14:7 says it, and if he doeth anything good, or if he so like, and if he doeth good, he doeth it unwillingly, and at the last he would declare his wickedness. You see, so they push it as if they're doing something good, but really there's an alternative. There's a an agenda behind it, right? It's always them pushing it as if something good for humanity, is good for the people, it's for safety, it's for protection, it's for this and for that. But ultimately there's always some underhand you know uh, 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 agenda or um, reason for pushing this out, right? And of course that's for more control, more surveillance, more restrictions, you know, and that's ultimately to stop information, to stop this, the truth from expanding further, right? Because they understand that this is a problem. That's why they have Vocab Malone and all these other guys, all these other Christians, coming up against the Hebrew Israelites and, what I'm saying, trying to hinder the message and throw a lot of, garbage out there, and and slander out there to try to, paint us as being this, these um, crazy group of people, these radical, what I'm saying, angry, possibly violent people, right? And that something has to be done about these guys, you know. But anyway, um, let's get uh, let's get Psalms 94, and we'll start at verse 20, or we'll read verse 20. Oh, Salakia, spelled it wrong. Psalm 94 and verse 20, it says, "Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by law?" When you read this in the NLT, it says, "Can unjust leaders claim that the Most High is on their side? Leaders whose decrees permit injustice," right? And this is one of the decrees, that, oh, we're going to do this in the name of child safety, right? But really, the motive behind it is to restrict and hinder this truth, hinder the word, right? These are all stepping stones, right? To hinder the word, hinder the truth, right? And to bring those who are of dissenting voices, to so-called justice, right? We're gonna lock them up. We're gonna put them in these concentration camps, right? Put them in these re-education programs, right? This is all what it's for, to label people as far as who is gonna be a threat or who is an enemy, and those who are down with the system. They're categorizing everybody right now, right? That's why the AI, is very prevalent, in your phones, in your computers, and all that, in social media, right? They're allowing people to use it, but not knowing that it's it's working for them. It's tracking everything. But anyway, let me see. Let's get Amos 5. And I ain't gonna make this too long. I'm just gonna read this real quick. Amos 5 and verse 10. "They hate him that rebuketh in the gate, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly." Yeah, man. They hate the fact that uh, Jake is out here, teaching them the right way to break down the scriptures. They hate the fact that, we come to find out that we're the true Israelites, right? They hate the fact that we know that they're the Edomites, talking about the so-called white people, right? They hate the fact that we proclaim their downfall, right? That Yahweh Shai is coming back to punish them, and in the kingdom, they're going to be our slaves, right? They hate all this, In their minds, they believe that they're going to reign and rule forever. So in their minds, they're like, how dare they, how dare these slaves, these these niggers, these wetbacks, come against us, right? But I'm gonna read this back. It says, "They hate him that rebuketh in the gate; they abhor him that speaketh uprightly," right? Because in Esau's world, which he built all this thing full of lies. Everything is always some grand conspiracy. Everything is always lies on top of lies on top of lies. So all it takes is the truth to dismantle all these lies, man. That he has built this wall of lies around him, and this truth is just crippling every pillar that they have set up, man. You see, and this is why it's hurting them. That's why they need this truth, to be, off any mainstream or any platform, form of exposure, right? Which is the reason why they don't talk about us on the news. And if they do talk about us on the news, is to degrade us, right? Or to, paint us as being, violent, or some criminal organization or whatever, right? But anyway, let me close it off with this. Isaiah 55, because one thing you got to consider, talking to you Jakes, you so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, is that you don't have much time. You know, there was a time when you could, just live your life and, saying, be ignorant to everything. But now that time is coming to an end, right? You're seeing what's going on around you. You're seeing, you know, these wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes in diverse places, pestilences, new pestilences popping up, right? Talks of famine, you know, uh, prices of everything skyrocketing, right? A love of many waxing cold, and then all the things that you're seeing in the horizon that's coming, right? With this AI and digital surveillance and right and just the order, the ideas, the how should I put it? Um, Pretty much the plans that your leaders have in mind. You know what I'm saying? It's nothing good, right? So you should consider, you know, what you're gonna do when this time comes, right? When this evil day comes, you should consider right now what it is you're about to do, man. Because if you're talking about, doomsday prepping and, what I'm saying, building a bunker and supplying your house with, well, stocking your house with, food and cans and all this and that, none of that's going to save you. None of that's going to be able to deliver you in this time that I'm talking about, that we've, the prophets over here have been talking about. People think that they can just brush this off like it's going to be, just some bad day. No, this is going to be the bad day. The worst day in history, or the worst time in history, because it ain't going to be just one day. It's going to be a period of time where a lot of Jake is going to fall, is going to die. That's why it's called Jacob's trouble, right? But let me read this. This is Isaiah 55 and verse 6. It says, "Seek ye the Lord Yahweh while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near." Right? So you got to call upon him while he's near. How is he near? He's near through his men, the prophets. The fact that you have access, to go out, in the, in the streets and see these men out there prophesying, ask questions, right? Or even through the videos, what I'm saying, on YouTube. You can, drop a question if you have any questions or comments, or, what I'm saying? Like, the Most High made it easy for y'all to hear this, to get it. So this is how he's near. But it says, verse 7, "Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts." Right? So you got to turn away from your old ways, right? You got to put off that old man and put on the new. It says, and let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him. So the Most High is merciful. He will forgive you, for anything you've done, as long as you turn away from that. It says, and to our power, for he will abundantly pardon. You see? So the Most High's hand is stretched out. All you gotta do is take it. You see? And it's as simple as that, But again, the Most High calls on who he calls. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't elect that have been predestined right from the beginning of time to fulfill these roles. And then you have 2/3 that have been predestined to fulfill the role of being destroyed, right? The role of destruction. You see? But anyway, our praise lesson was edifying. I'm gonna go ahead and close it out by giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Peace and blessings unto the hopeful elect, pushing his word throughout the four corners of the earth in truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Until the next time, I'm going to say Shalom, Kwam Yashala.